for us, this has consequences. So big positions, when people take on big offices, they have big consequences and big positions. So if people are worried, it's okay. It's okay to be a little bit concerned. It's okay to have some anxiety surrounding these developments. However, as I tell people, we have to remember that the office of the Pope was set up by Jesus Christ himself. If it's going to assuage some people's anxieties, it's that the Holy Spirit is still working. And hopefully, through the election of the College of Cardinals, we find ourselves with a holy man, with somebody who wants to lead the faithful, with somebody who wants to teach the perennial teachings of the church according to the magisterium, according to the way Jesus Christ set himself up, or set us up, shall we say, with the morals of the church, with the idea of what is good for us as human beings, being made by God, and having to answer to the one God. These are the important things to consider. It's okay to be anxious. There's no question about that, because it can be jarring to our faith, but a lot of people are a lot more worried about the prophecies. And like I always say, we're living right now. We're not living in the world of prophecies. The prophecies are interesting, and I love to read them. I love to see what Our Lady says. But hopefully that moves us to making changes in our lives currently, not just waiting for something terrible to happen. Before the break, I was reading about the chastisements that Our Lady mentioned in when her apparition at Fatima. We were talking about the first one, which was that of more wars. We typically think of war as bombs and destruction. The article says it has already been demonstrated that one bomb can completely annihilate a major city, killing hundreds of thousands or perhaps even millions of people instantly and indiscriminately. Today, there exist enough weapons of mass destruction, atom bombs, neutron bombs, hydrogen bombs, to wipe out all humanity many times over. This obviously makes mankind's situation much more precarious than in previous ages. Our only way out of this dilemma is the consecration of Russia. So there's a lot of controversy as to whether or not Russia was consecrated or not consecrated. There's a lot of fear surrounding this prophecy of more wars. And classically, yes, this article touches on the wars that we think of when we think of weapons of mass destructions, of different bombs, of annihilating cities and whole countries. That's pretty powerful stuff. But the reality is this. How many times do we think about the wars or the wars that can happen just in our own homes, in our own friendships at the workplace? How many times do we think of war or the prophecy of war from Fatima as, we worry so much about these big wars that can be started by political leaders, and yet we forget about the reality of, am I making war with my own family? Am I picking fights with my family members just to see them upset? Am I creating jealousies? Am I enjoying watching people's fall, or watching somebody not succeed in something? These are the wars that we need to really ask ourselves about, because I have no control over the wars that the politicians are doing. I have no control if somebody's going to push the button, as they say. That I have no idea about. That I just have to be ready for myself and go to church, pray my rosary, lead a sacramental life. That's all I can do in terms of that. I have no control over what politicians do, really, other than cast my vote. Once I cast my vote, I did my job, and I can't control what people do. However, what about the world immediately around me? What about, am I picking any wars with my wife? Am I picking wars with my children? Am I bringing up the people around me? At work, am I purposefully making somebody's life difficult? These are things that come up that I hear in therapy all the time. People will admit this stuff to me. It's funny how I talk to my priest friends and I say, gosh, I listen to confessions all day long. And a lot of priests tell me that they listen to people with mental illness all day long. And I say, I listen to confessions all day long. People come and tell me how they really did do something to upset a coworker, and how they are trying to get back at their boss, and how they're they're frustrated with their spouse for whatever reason, and they're going to make their life miserable, and they want to exert revenge on them. What about these wars? Those are the wars that I worry a lot more about, because whether the atomic bomb, the hydrogen bomb, the nuclear bomb, comes around, my life's going to end one day or another. How that's going to happen, I don't know. But what am I doing to prepare my heart for it? What am I doing to prepare to meet Christ for it? These are the anxieties that we should have, or I shouldn't say anxieties. This is what we should concern our hearts with on an everyday basis, as to how am I going to be prepared to meet Christ? These are important things to consider. What about the second chastisement from Our Lady of Fatima? It was the chastisement was famine. Our Lady of Fatima said that there would be a famine if we weren't changing our lives. And the article says it is evident that many millions of people who continue to starve in the world over, despite all modern attempts to solve the hunger problem. In one of Blessed Jacinta's visions, she foresaw streets crowded with starving people, and she asked Lucy, "Can't you see all those highways and roads full of people who are crying with hunger and have nothing to eat?" Well, we think about that again classically as food, and we say, gosh, in this world, we have so much food, and it is a travesty that people go without, and that people actually do go hungry, and that there's countries in this world where there is absolutely no reason, given how much food we can produce, that we can't get food throughout the world. There's no reason for people to not be able to have a full belly every day in reality. And that's what really comes down to politics. However, we also need to think about this in a different way. We think about famine, we think about physical food, but what about the hunger, the spiritual hunger that a lot of people feel? Now, a chastisement sometimes comes from going to knock on a church door because you are inspired to do a very good confession because you feel frustrated and you have a sense of metanoia and you realize that you need to change your life. And you go to your local parish, you knock on the rectory and you pray to God that there is a priest there. And how many times do you find that fathers are off doing their conferences? They're very busy on different committees. They ask you to come back on Saturday for the 1 hour confession time to stand in line and hope that you get it. And the funniest thing I think I ever saw was standing in line for confession one day and seeing people try to cut into the confession line. And I thought, I don't know, do you confess that? I thought it was just kind of the irony was hilarious to me, to be honest with you. But I figured they might have needed it more than somebody else because maybe they've been coming multiple times and can't get in and they're just desperate to get a confession. How powerful is confession and how readily available is it really to us? You know, we can make the time for sure. We can say, well, what time is the confession at that church? I'm going to get there an hour early and stand in line. But how many people have that time actually? How many times do we go to a rectory or want to find a confession and can't? How many times are we starved spiritually? The biggest shocker, I thought, more than anything else, was when we were in the middle of quarantine and COVID, how many of us were starved spiritually because our diocese shut down? The churches were closed. We did not have access to the Eucharist. We did not have access to confession. Our church did not exist for a while. Obviously, we had our faith in our hearts and Jesus was there, but that could have been a chastisement. Who's to say that the whole COVID shutdown was not a chastisement? How many times are we spiritually hungry? I think that that's a bigger thing to concern ourselves with. What about the third chastisement? It says persecution of the church is evident to all, Catholic and non-Catholic alike. So the third chastisement was persecution of the church. The Catholic Church is undergoing a terrible persecution and is attacked constantly in her moral teachings, her doctrine, and her members, especially by forces wishing to destroy God's reign in souls. The destruction being wrought in the church is a chastisement upon the entire world because the church, so oppressed internally and externally, finds it difficult to bring about the consecration of Russia. This lack of compliance results in the ongoing wars that afflicted the world. Again, controversy over whether Russia was consecrated or not consecrated. Our Lady said that if Russia was not consecrated to her Immaculate Heart, she would spread her errors. We find Russia back on the world stage with the war against the Ukraine. But what I worry more about is the persecution of the church. Yes, we worry about, say, every year in Easter or Christmas, the Satanic Temple decides to put on their displays because they want to challenge the church. Sure, okay, that happens. But I expect that. I expect people who are not Catholic to chastise the church, to try to persecute the church, to try to shut down the church. That's expected. What about the persecution from within the church? And what I mean by that is, how many times do we see political figures or people who are baptized Catholics, who proclaim to be baptized Catholics, who say that they are part of the church and take their opportunity, their public position, being elected officials, to preach against the church and to say that they believe that they are right and that they, essentially go against the teachings of the church because they feel that it's not what the church teaches. They want to teach, they want to preach their own commandments, their own ideas of the church. And what does that do to the Catholic faithful? We forget who to follow. We forget to say, well, let's go back to the books. Or even more challenging is when people do publicly defame the church or say things contrary to the church, and there is no correction from the local bishops, from the Pope himself, if it is at that stage. That, I think, is the bigger travesty in terms of the persecution of the church, because it leads to confusion. And when there's confusion, then people will oftentimes decide, you know what, if there's confusion in my heart, what am I following this for? We need to pray to the Holy Spirit to give us clarity. That's what the Holy Spirit is there for. That's one of his offices and one of his jobs, to give us knowledge, to give us clarity, and to say, hey, this is what the truth is, regardless of what the wolf in sheep's clothing are telling you. So the persecution of the church, yes, I can expect that from outside. I can expect that just the same way Jesus was crucified. But if we look at the way Jesus was crucified, he was actually betrayed from within his own church. That's how the church is going to fall. God is omnipotent. There is nothing that can challenge God. God is in charge of everything, all things. God is in charge of heaven and hell. There's no question about that. We see that in deliverance ministry all the time. Demons can't do anything without God's permission. Why God permits things? Well, I'll ask God. I'll understand that when I talk to God, because God knows better. And I'll say, wow, that was pretty cool. That's why God permitted that.